Sting him! Make him suffer!
Welcome to Shadows of Black History. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city and your country. If you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us bring powerful, untold stories to life. Now, listen carefully. This video is a work of historical fiction. The characters, events, locations, and timeline are fictional. This story is created for narrative purposes and is inspired by themes of resistance, power, and survival during slavery in America. Relax. Clear your mind. Remove distractions, because what you are about to hear will stay with you. Magnolia Grove Plantation, Mississippi, August 17th, 1856. Patience was just a beekeeper. That is what everyone believed. She moved quietly through the edges of the cotton fields, tending wooden hives placed near the tree line. The enslaved people called her gentle. The overseer called her useful. The master barely noticed her at all. She worked with bees. That was her world, until the day they sold her 12-year-old son. His name was Samuel. They said he broke a porcelain vase in the main house. It belonged to the mistress. It came from France. They said it was expensive. They said an example had to be made. So, they sold him. Just like that. One afternoon he was there. The next morning he was gone, chained to a trader's wagon heading south. No goodbye, no mercy. Patience did not scream. She did not fall to the ground. She did not beg. She stood still, and something inside her changed forever. What Magnolia Grove Plantation did not know was that Patience carried a memory older than Mississippi soil. She was born on the western coast of Africa, taken as a child. She remembered stories whispered by her grandmother under moonlight, stories of the Yoruba kingdoms, of queens who ruled with wisdom and warriors who defended their land. Her grandmother had taught her something else, the sacred knowledge of bees, not just how to harvest honey, but how to command swarms. In her homeland, bees were not only providers of sweetness, they were guardians, they were defenders, they were living shields. Patience remembered every lesson, and for 6 months, she prepared, quietly, carefully. She built more hives in the woods beyond the plantation. She fed them, she nurtured them, she studied their rhythm, she learned their moods. 200,000 bees, 200,000 tiny wings waiting for direction. She never rushed. She waited for the right night. And that night came on August 17th. The master hosted a celebration dinner. Wealthy neighbors arrived in carriages. Laughter echoed from the main house. Candles flickered. Wine poured freely. Music drifted through open windows. They celebrated profits. They celebrated harvest. They celebrated themselves. No one noticed Patience walking through the darkness behind the house. No one noticed her hands, steady and calm. No one noticed the smoke she carried, not to calm bees, but to guide them. She had prepared the chimneys. She had studied the draft of the wind. She had waited for the heat of the kitchen fires to rise. And when the moment was right, she opened the hives. The air changed. At first, it was only a hum, then a vibration, then a dark moving cloud rising into the Mississippi night. The bees followed warmth. They followed smoke. They followed instinct. Through the chimneys they poured, into the ballroom, into the dining hall, into the rooms filled with laughter. The music stopped first. Then came confusion. Chairs overturned. Voices shouted. Candles fell. The elegant dinner became chaos in seconds. The swarm did not choose sides. It filled the air completely. Windows shattered as guests fought to escape. Outside, enslaved workers stood frozen in the darkness, watching, hearing, not moving. 30 minutes felt like an eternity. When silence finally returned, Magnolia Grove Plantation was changed forever. 8 people would never rise again. The master survived, but he would never host another celebration. And Patience? By sunrise, she was gone. Her cabin was empty, her hives abandoned. Some say she fled north. Some say she disappeared into the swamps. Some say she returned to the ocean that had stolen her childhood. But among the enslaved people, a different story spread. They whispered that the daughter of a Yoruba queen had reminded Mississippi that power does not always roar. Sometimes it hums, and when it rises together, it cannot be ignored. Remember, this story is historical fiction. It is inspired by the spirit of resistance and survival that lived in the hearts of many enslaved people. History is full of courage, full of quiet strength, full of stories that speak of dignity even in darkness. If this story moved you, tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Share your thoughts, and if you have not subscribed to Shadows of Black History, subscribe now and like this video. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never underestimate the power of those history tried to silence. Magnolia Grove Plantation did not recover. The newspapers did not print the truth. They printed confusion. They printed speculation. They printed anything except what really happened inside that dining room. They called it a tragic accident. They called it an unfortunate infestation. They blamed the summer heat. They blamed poor chimney structure. They never mentioned Patience. They never mentioned her son. They never mentioned the months of preparation, hidden in plain sight. But the enslaved people remembered. And memory travels in ways paper never can. The master of Magnolia Grove tried to rebuild his reputation. He told neighboring planters it was sabotage. He told them someone must have tampered with the hives. He hired men to search the woods for days. They found empty boxes, broken frames. No bees, no beekeeper. No trace of the woman who had once walked quietly between the fields and the tree line. The overseer claimed he had always suspected her, but he had never watched closely, because to them, she was invisible. And invisibility can be power. Word spread beyond Mississippi. It traveled through whispers carried along riverboats. It traveled through kitchens and barns. It traveled through hands picking cotton and backs bent in cane fields. The story changed slightly each time it was told. Some said there were 300,000 bees. Some said the swarm blocked out the moon. Some said Patience stood outside the house and raised her hands like a queen commanding an army. Truth and legend began to blend, but one detail never changed. She had answered injustice with strategy, not rage, not chaos. Strategy. In cabins lit by small oil lamps, mothers told their children about the woman who understood nature better than any overseer understood control. They told them that knowledge is power, that patience can be sharper than anger, that preparation can defeat arrogance. The story became more than revenge. It became instruction. It became a reminder that even under oppression, the mind remains free, and a free mind can reshape destiny. Months later, a trader passing through Louisiana claimed he had seen a woman matching her description, working near the swamps. Calm, quiet, surrounded by wooden boxes, humming with life. Another rumor said she had reached the coast and boarded a ship heading south. No proof ever surfaced. Magnolia Grove never admitted failure. Official records remained clean, but absence can speak louder than ink. As seasons changed, the plantation's profits declined. Superstition crept in. Workers whispered that the land itself had rejected cruelty. The master grew withdrawn. He avoided large gatherings. He ordered chimneys sealed with fine mesh screens. He ordered every hive within 5 miles destroyed. Fire consumed boxes that once held honey and hope. Yet destruction of wood could not erase memory of wings. Years later, after the war reshaped the South, elders still spoke her name softly. Not as a villain, not as a myth, but as a symbol. They said she proved that power does not always sit in the big house. Sometimes it stands in the tree line, patient and observant. Sometimes it waits for the perfect moment. Sometimes it studies quietly, while others laugh loudly. And that is the part history often misses. Resistance is not always loud. It is not always recorded. It does not always wear a uniform or carry a banner. Sometimes it hums in the background until the night it decides to rise. Remember again, this story is historical fiction, inspired by themes of resistance, power, and survival. It reflects the emotional truth of an era when countless enslaved people endured injustice and searched for ways to reclaim dignity. If this story held your attention, tell us where you are watching from. Share your thoughts below. And if you have not subscribed to Shadows of Black History, subscribe and like this video. Because stories, whether fact or fiction, remind us of something powerful. Oppression can silence voices, but it can never silence imagination, memory, or the will to resist. Magnolia Grove Plantation, Mississippi. August 17th, 1856. The air was thick with the late summer heat, the kind that pressed against the skin and made every breath feel heavy. Cicadas sang from the trees, and the cotton fields stretched pale and endless beneath the fading sun. Magnolia Grove stood proud in the center of it all. White columns, wide porch, polished windows reflecting the last light of day. To anyone passing by, it looked peaceful, prosperous, untouchable. But peace can be an illusion, and prosperity can be built on silence. Patience moved quietly along the edge of the property, near the tree line where her wooden bee boxes rested in careful rows. To the master and his guests, she was simply the beekeeper, a useful woman, a quiet woman, a woman who kept to herself and smelled faintly of smoke and honey. They did not look at her long enough to see the intelligence in her eyes. They did not ask where she learned her skill. They did not ask about the way she handled the bees without fear. They did not know that her calm was not submission. It was discipline. 6 months earlier, her world had been broken in a single afternoon. Her son, Samuel, only 12 years old, had been called into the big house to serve at table. A porcelain vase had fallen and shattered across the polished floor. The mistress screamed. The master demanded punishment. No one asked questions. No one cared that the boy's hands trembled from carrying plates too heavy for his small frame. By sunset, a trader had been summoned. By morning, Samuel was gone, chained among strangers, heading south. The price of a vase had been counted higher than the value of a child. Patience did not scream when they took him. She did not collapse. She did not beg. She stood still. And in that stillness, something ancient awakened. Long before Mississippi, before cotton fields, before ships and chains, there had been another life. She remembered fragments, the rhythm of drums, the stories of her grandmother, the proud words spoken of queens and warriors. She remembered being told that she descended from strength, that knowledge was an inheritance no one could steal. Among the lessons whispered in her childhood was one about bees. Not only how to gather honey, but how to understand the hive, how to guide it, how to respect its power. At Magnolia Grove, bees were considered harmless creatures of profit, Honey-sweetened tea in the big house, wax-sealed letters and candles. No one imagined the hive as anything but a tool. That misunderstanding would become their weakness. Patience began her preparation the very next day, after Samuel was sold. She did not rush. Rage burns hot, but fades quickly. She needed something steady. She began expanding the hives. She built new boxes from discarded wood. She placed them deeper in the trees, where shade kept them cool and hidden. She fed the colonies carefully, encouraging growth. She studied their patterns. She listened to the change in their hum. 200,000 bees can sound like a storm if you know how to listen. The overseer passed by her many times during those months. He saw her smoke pot. He saw her lifting frames heavy with honey. He never once asked why the number of hives had grown. Bees meant profit. Profit meant approval. Approval meant no suspicion. Invisibility remained her shield. As summer deepened, Magnolia Grove prepared for celebration. The master had enjoyed a successful season. Cotton prices were high. Neighboring planters were invited to a grand dinner on August 17th. There would be music. There would be wine. There would be laughter echoing from polished floors and crystal glasses. Enslaved workers were ordered to prepare food for days in advance. The kitchen fires would burn hot into the night. Chimneys would draw smoke upward in steady streams. Patience watched it all. She noted the wind direction. She studied the kitchen chimney and the parlor chimney. She tested how smoke rose in the evening air. Bees follow scent, heat, and disturbance. She knew this as surely as she knew her own heartbeat. On the night of the celebration, the plantation glowed with candlelight. Carriages rolled in one by one. Laughter spilled across the lawn. Silk dresses brushed against polished wood. Men spoke loudly of profit and politics. The sound carried across the darkened yard, where the enslaved stood in waiting silence. Behind the main house, near the tree line, Patience moved. Her steps were measured, her breathing steady. She carried smoke, but not to calm. Smoke guides, smoke directs. She opened the first hive gently. The hum shifted immediately, rising from low vibration to alert resonance. She opened another, and another. A living cloud began to gather, wings catching moonlight. Heat from the kitchen fires rose strong into the night sky. The chimneys pulled air upward with force. The bees followed the column of warmth and scent, instinct guiding them toward the source. What began as a hum became a surge, a dark current of motion lifting from the woods. Inside, the master raised a glass for a toast. Guests laughed. Glass touched glass. Music played. Then someone paused. A faint vibration touched the air. It grew louder. Confusion flickered across faces. The first bees entered through the chimney, drawn downward by draft and light. Then more. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The music stopped. A woman screamed. A chair fell. Hands waved wildly in the air. Candle flames shook. Smoke mixed with panic. Bees filled the room in a thick, moving cloud. Guests rushed toward doors, but the swarm followed heat and motion. Windows shattered as bodies pushed outward in fear. The orderly dinner dissolved into chaos within moments. Outside, the enslaved workers heard everything. The confusion, the shouting, the crash of breaking glass. The sound was not loud like gunfire. It was layered, a rising storm of wings and voices tangled together. 30 minutes can feel endless when fear replaces laughter. When silence returned, it was heavy. The yard smelled of smoke and sweat. 8 guests would not rise again. Others would carry scars in body and memory. The master survived, But something inside him fractured that night. His certainty, his sense of control, his belief that the world moved according to his will. Before dawn, Patience was gone. Her cabin stood empty. The hives near the tree line were abandoned. Some bees had scattered back into the woods, reclaiming wild space. Others had perished in the chaos they were drawn into. Nature had answered disturbance with force, then returned to quiet. Search parties combed the swamps for days. They found nothing. The master told neighbors it had been an accident. He blamed faulty chimney construction. He blamed unusual heat. He never spoke her name publicly. To do so would be to admit he had been outmaneuvered by someone he had considered invisible. Among the enslaved community, however, her name was spoken softly, carefully, not with laughter, not with cruelty, but with understanding. She had not struck in blind rage. She had studied. She had prepared. She had used knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge they believed chains had erased. Years later, after war swept across Mississippi and the old order collapsed, elders still told the story in quiet voices. They did not celebrate suffering. They did not dwell on chaos. They remembered the lesson, that power can exist where it is least expected, that patience can be sharper than fury, that even in a world built on domination, there are cracks invisible to those who believe themselves untouchable. This story is a work of historical fiction. The characters, events, and plantation described here are fictional, inspired by themes of resistance, power, and survival. It reminds us that while textbooks record laws and battles, the emotional truths of oppression and resistance live in imagination and memory as well. And sometimes, the loudest force in history does not roar. Sometimes, it hums. The morning after the celebration, Magnolia Grove did not wake to birdsong and routine. It woke to silence, the kind of silence that settles after something irreversible has taken place. The front steps of the big house were scattered with broken glass. Torn fabric clung to rose bushes. Servants moved carefully, eyes lowered, sweeping evidence into piles that would later be burned. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the overseer, a man known for shouting before sunrise, moved with restrained tension. The master remained inside for hours, curtains drawn, doctor summoned, neighbors arriving in hushed disbelief. The official explanation began forming almost immediately. A tragic occurrence, an unfortunate swarm, an act of nature beyond prediction. No mention of preparation, no mention of a beekeeper who had quietly expanded her hives over months. It was easier to call it chance than to admit intention. Easier to blame the wind than to question authority. But those who worked the fields knew better. They had watched Patience for years. They had seen the discipline in the way she handled smoke and hive. They had noticed how the colonies grew stronger each season. They had heard her hum old melodies under her breath, songs that did not belong to Mississippi soil. They understood that what happened was not chaos. It was calculation. By midday, riders were sent out in all directions. Swamps were searched, riverbanks inspected, dogs were brought in. The master demanded answers. He demanded capture. He demanded punishment. Yet the woods offered no trace. The swamp kept its secrets. The river flowed steady and indifferent. Nature does not betray those who understand it. Whispers spread faster than search parties. By evening, neighboring plantations had heard the story. Some exaggerated it. Some dismissed it. Some quietly feared it. Chimneys were inspected across the county. Hives were destroyed as precaution. Orders were given to limit gatherings. A subtle shift occurred in planter society. For the first time in many years, laughter at dinner tables carried an undertone of unease. Among the enslaved, the story transformed into something more than an event. It became a symbol. They spoke of patience not as a destroyer, but as a reminder that invisibility can hide preparation, a reminder that knowledge passed through generations can survive ships, chains, and fields, a reminder that no system is so complete that it cannot be disrupted. The master of Magnolia Grove tried to restore control. He ordered new rules. He tightened patrols. He shortened gatherings. Yet authority, once shaken, rarely returns unchanged. Servants noticed he no longer lingered near fireplaces. He sealed chimneys with fine mesh screens. He walked through his halls with a tension that had not existed before. Fear had entered the big house, and fear does not leave easily. Seasons turned. Cotton was harvested. War clouds gathered over the nation. By the time conflict erupted in 1861, Magnolia Grove was already altered. The master's wealth diminished. The war drained resources. Enslaved workers listened carefully as news traveled of armies and proclamations. When freedom finally came years later, Magnolia Grove stood weathered and quiet, its columns stained by time. Patience's fate remained unknown. Some claimed she had joined maroon communities hidden deep in southern swamps. Others said she traveled north, along secret routes guided by sympathetic hands. A few whispered she returned to the coast, drawn by memory of waves and stories from childhood. No official record ever confirmed her path. Yet absence sometimes builds legend stronger than presence. In freedom's early days, elders continued to tell her story around small fires and in church gatherings. They did not focus on vengeance. They focused on preparation, on discipline, on the quiet strength that comes from remembering who you are, even when the world tries to erase you. They told young children that survival is not only endurance, it is awareness, it is learning, it is waiting for the right moment. Magnolia Grove Plantation eventually fell into disrepair. Vines crept along cracked walls. The fields were divided and sold. The chimneys that once drew a deadly swarm stood empty and cold. Travelers passing through the region heard fragments of the tale, though few believed it fully. History books did not record it. Newspapers of the era avoided uncomfortable explanations, yet memory outlived ink. This fictional story speaks to deeper truths. During slavery, countless acts of resistance went unrecorded. Some were quiet, some were bold, some were strategic. Many were never written down. Enslaved people resisted in ways both visible and hidden, proving that oppression never fully controls the human spirit. Patience's story, though imagined, reflects that enduring truth. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly in the shadows, patient and disciplined. Sometimes it waits months for a single moment. Sometimes it understands nature better than those who believe they command it. And in that understanding lies a powerful lesson. Systems built on arrogance often overlook the strength of those they consider insignificant. They mistake silence for weakness. They mistake calm for submission. But calm can be preparation. Silence can be strategy. And patience can change the course of a night that was meant for celebration into one that history can never fully forget. Thank you for continuing this journey with Shadows of Black History. If this story held your attention, tell us where you are watching from, your city, and your country. If you have not subscribed and liked our channel, please do so. Stories like this remind us that imagination can illuminate emotional truths about resistance, power, and survival. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember that even the quietest hum can carry immense power. In the years that followed, Magnolia Grove became less a plantation and more a warning whispered through the region. Even after the war ended and emancipation reshaped the South, older residents still spoke of the night the air turned dark with wings. Children who had not yet been born in 1856 grew up hearing fragments of the tale. They did not always know the details, but they knew the feeling attached to it, a feeling that power is never as secure as it believes. Formerly enslaved families who remained in the area after freedom often walked past the abandoned tree line where patience once kept her hives. Nature had reclaimed the space. Wildflowers grew between rotting boards. Bees returned in smaller, natural colonies, building hives in hollow trunks without human direction. Some elders would pause there and close their eyes, listening to the soft hum drifting through warm air. Not in fear, not in celebration, but in remembrance. The story shifted again during Reconstruction. As black communities began building schools and churches, preachers sometimes referenced a woman who understood timing better than anger. They never called her by name in sermons. Instead, they spoke of wisdom inherited from ancestors. They spoke of knowledge that slavery could not extinguish. The lesson was always the same. Preparation is power. Discipline is strength. White families who once attended that dinner rarely mentioned it publicly. In private, some insisted it had been a freak occurrence. Others admitted, quietly, that something about the timing felt deliberate. Yet pride prevented deeper admission. To acknowledge intention would be to admit vulnerability, so the official story remained incomplete. It became easier over time to forget details than to confront them. As decades passed and the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Magnolia Grove faded from maps and memory alike. Fields were divided. Railroads shifted trade routes. New towns emerged. But oral history does not disappear easily. It travels through kitchens, porches, and pews. It reshapes itself to fit new generations, while holding on to its core meaning. In some versions of the tale, patience became larger than life. In others, she was portrayed as quiet and nearly invisible. The numbers changed. The description of the swarm grew or shrank. Yet the emotional center remained constant. A mother who lost her child. A woman who remembered her heritage. A beekeeper who turned overlooked knowledge into decisive action. Modern storytellers sometimes revisit the legend and debate whether such an event could truly occur. Scholars question logistics. Scientists analyze bee behavior. Historians search for records. They find none that match the full narrative, and that absence confirms what we already know. This is historical fiction, a narrative shaped to explore deeper themes rather than to document a specific recorded event. But fiction inspired by history can still illuminate truth. Enslaved people did resist. They resisted through escape, sabotage, learning to read in secret, preserving language, and passing down memory. They resisted by surviving. They resisted by refusing to let identity disappear. Patience's fictional act reflects the spirit of countless real individuals who sought ways to reclaim dignity in a system designed to deny it. The image of bees, moving as one body, holds symbolic weight. A single bee may seem small. A swarm moves with force. Enslaved communities often functioned in similar unity. Quiet communication, shared awareness, mutual protection. Strength multiplied through collective motion. The hive becomes metaphor. Discipline becomes defense. As we step back from this imagined story, consider why it resonates. It resonates because it centers a woman who appeared powerless, yet carried hidden knowledge. It resonates because it challenges assumptions about who holds control. It resonates because it transforms nature from background into participant. And it resonates because it reflects a universal truth. Underestimation can be costly. Magnolia Grove may be fictional, but plantations like it once existed across the South. The injustice, the separation of families, the arrogance of unchecked authority were very real. The pain of losing a child to sale was not fiction. The resilience of mothers was not fiction. The survival of African memory was not fiction. Those elements ground this story in emotional authenticity, even as its events remain imagined. Today, when we tell stories like this on Shadows of Black History, we do so with purpose. Not to glorify suffering, not to celebrate harm, but to explore the psychology of resistance, to highlight how knowledge, patience, and discipline can shift power in unexpected ways, to remind us that beneath silence there can be strategy, beneath calm there can be calculation. As you reflect on this narrative, ask yourself what true power looks like. Is it loud and visible, seated at a head table with raised glass, or is it quiet, observant, waiting for the moment when conditions align? History often teaches that those dismissed as insignificant can carry profound influence. Thank you for staying with this extended fictional journey. Tell us where you are watching from, your city and your country. If you have not subscribed and liked our channel, please do so. Stories inspired by resistance remind us that even in the darkest chapters of history, human ingenuity and dignity persist. Until next time, remain curious, remain thoughtful, and remember that sometimes the strongest force in the room is the one no one sees coming. As time continued to move forward, the legend of Magnolia Grove settled into the kind of story that lives between fact and folklore. It was never written in official county records. It was never carved into courthouse stone. Yet it survived in memory, carried by those who understood that not every truth fits neatly into a ledger. The older generation guarded it carefully. They did not shout it in marketplaces. They did not boast about it. They treated it like something sacred, a lesson wrapped inside a story. Young children would sometimes ask, "Was she real?" And elders would answer in a way that did not depend on proof. They would say, "Real enough. Real in the way that courage is real. Real in the way that grief is real. Real in the way that a mother's love is real." Because whether or not a swarm once filled a dining hall, countless mothers had lost children to sale. Countless women had carried strength silently. Countless enslaved people had used intelligence rather than force to survive. In that sense, patience represented many. After emancipation, when formerly enslaved families gathered to build new lives, they often spoke of knowledge as inheritance. They had been denied land. They had been denied wealth. They had been denied legal protection. But they had not been stripped of memory. Songs carried fragments of Africa. Recipes carried fragments of home. Stories carried fragments of resistance. The tale of the beekeeper fit naturally into that inheritance. It reminded listeners that what is learned can never be fully confiscated. By the time the 20th century arrived, Magnolia Grove as a physical place had nearly vanished. Storms weakened its roof. Vines climbed its pillars. Travelers passing through saw only ruins and assumed neglect. They did not know that once, laughter had turned to panic inside those walls. They did not know that once, a quiet woman had stood in the tree line and listened for the exact pitch of a hive ready to rise. History erases quickly when paper is silent, but oral tradition resists erasure. Writers and storytellers in later generations occasionally encountered fragments of the legend. Some tried to investigate. They searched archives. They searched letters. They found nothing concrete. Yet the absence of written evidence did not silence the narrative. Instead, it strengthened its symbolic meaning. It became less about a single plantation and more about the broader idea that oppression breeds creativity in unexpected ways. In classrooms, teachers sometimes discuss how enslaved people resisted in subtle forms. They slowed work. They preserved language. They learned to read secretly. They maintained spiritual practices. Fiction, like the story of Patience, adds another layer to that discussion. It imagines how ancestral knowledge might intersect with the opportunity. It imagines how preparation might shift power dynamics, even briefly. The image of bees continues to resonate. Bees function as a collective. They protect the hive instinctively. They respond to threat with coordinated force. In nature, their power lies not in size, but in unity. That symbolism mirrors the experience of enslaved communities who depended on collective strength. The hive becomes a metaphor for solidarity. The swarm becomes a metaphor for awakening. As modern audiences listen to this story, reactions vary. Some focus on the revenge element. Others focus on the strategy. Some are drawn to the ancestral memory of a Yoruba lineage. Others reflect on the emotional core of a mother separated from her son. Each listener finds a different entry point. That flexibility is part of storytelling's power. It allows imagination to explore emotional truth without claiming literal documentation. In telling this narrative, we maintain clarity. This is historical fiction. The plantation, the date, the characters are imagined, but the themes are grounded in reality. Slavery tore families apart. Mothers grieved in silence. African cultural memory survived against all odds. Enslaved individuals resisted in ways both recorded and unrecorded. The story of Patience weaves these truths into a single dramatic arc. If we step back even further, we see that stories like this function as cultural mirrors. They reflect longing for justice. They reflect frustration at silence in official records. They reflect admiration for resilience. And they remind us that history includes not only what was written down, but what was felt, remembered, and passed along. Magnolia Grove may exist only in imagination, but the emotions tied to it are rooted in real historical experience. The humiliation of sale, the invisibility imposed by hierarchy, the arrogance of unchecked power, the quiet intelligence of survival. These elements shaped countless lives across the American South. Fiction simply condenses them into a single focused narrative. As this story reaches its final echoes, imagine the sound that began it all. Not a scream, not a gunshot, just a low hum building slowly in warm night air. That hum represents awareness. It represents gathering strength. It represents patience, transforming into action. Whether in fiction or in life, that transformation is powerful. Thought. Thank you for remaining with Shadows of Black History through this extended fictional journey. Tell us where you are watching from, your city and your country. Share your reflections thoughtfully, and if you have not subscribed and liked our channel, please do so. Stories inspired by resistance and survival remind us that even when records fall silent, imagination can carry forward the emotional truths of history. Until next time, remain curious, remain reflective, and remember that sometimes the quietest presence holds the greatest potential. Over time, the story of Magnolia Grove took on a rhythm of its own. It no longer needed proof to survive. It lived in tone, in pause, in the way elders leaned forward when telling it. They would lower their voices at certain moments, letting silence hang before describing the hum in the air. They would not rush through the loss of Samuel. They would not dramatize the chaos inside the house. Instead, they focused on what came before. The waiting, the discipline, the steady hands lifting hive lids one by one. In many ways, that focus reveals the deeper lesson of the narrative. Power is often misunderstood. It is imagined as loud, immediate, and forceful. But real power can be slow. It can be observant. It can gather quietly until the moment is right. In the fields of Mississippi and across countless real plantations in American history, enslaved people learned to survive by studying systems closely. They learned schedules. They learned weaknesses. They learned how to communicate without being overheard. Strategy became a necessary language. The fictional figure of Patience embodies that strategic intelligence. She does not act impulsively. She does not strike without preparation. She expands her knowledge before she makes her move. The bees in this story are not only insects. They represent accumulated awareness. They represent collective strength. They represent how something small and overlooked can become overwhelming when unified. As years turned into decades, Magnolia Grove existed mostly in memory and metaphor. Freed families who left Mississippi carried fragments of the story north during migration. In Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis, it was retold in small apartments and on front porches during summer evenings. It blended with other stories of resistance. It adapted to new environments, but it always kept its core. A mother who refused to remain powerless. A system that underestimated her. A lesson about patience. Scholars who later examined oral traditions across Southern communities often noted how legends develop around themes of reversal. The powerless becoming powerful. The invisible becoming visible. The underestimated revealing strength. The story of the beekeeper fits that pattern. It reflects a universal human desire to see justice restored, even if only symbolically. Yet what gives this fictional account weight is not spectacle. It is grief. At its center is the loss of a child. Throughout American slavery, the sale of children was tragically common. Families were divided without warning. Mothers stood powerless as wagons rolled away. That pain is documented in letters, narratives, and testimonies from formerly enslaved individuals. The fictional response in this story is dramatic, but the emotional spark that ignites it is historically real. When audiences today hear this narrative, some focus on the act itself. Others reflect on the emotional journey leading to it. But the most important layer may be the reminder that enslaved people were never empty figures in the background of history. They carried memory. They carried skill. They carried identity that predated enslavement. They carried traditions from Africa that survived in altered forms across generations. In this imagined account, the Yoruba heritage of patience symbolizes that continuity. Whether queen's daughter or village child, many Africans brought knowledge with them across the Atlantic. Agricultural skill, metalwork, spiritual practice, music, storytelling. Those traditions did not vanish. They transformed. They adapted. They survived. The idea of ancestral knowledge guiding present action is rooted in real historical experience, even when expressed through fiction. As we approach the closing reflection, consider how stories function beyond documentation. Official records often center those in power. Plantation logs recorded crop yields, property counts, and transactions. They rarely captured inner lives. Fiction and oral tradition fill those gaps. They imagine perspectives that written archives ignored. They give emotional voice where paper was silent. Magnolia Grove may not appear in any historical ledger, but the emotional truth it explores remains anchored in the lived reality of American slavery. Oppression existed, resistance existed, loss existed, survival existed. The story blends these realities into a single narrative thread that invites reflection rather than simple consumption. The hum of bees fades as the story closes, but its echo lingers. It lingers as a reminder that silence can contain intention. It lingers as a reminder that underestimation can be costly. It lingers as a reminder that even in imagined history, the themes of resilience and strategy are grounded in truth. Thank you for staying with Shadows of Black History through every continuation of this fictional account. If this story sparked thought, reflection, or emotion, share your perspective in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. If you have not subscribed and liked our channel, please do so. We continue to explore narratives that illuminate deeper truths about resistance, power, and survival. Until next time, remain thoughtful, remain curious, and remember that history is not only what was written, it is also what was remembered, imagined, and passed forward.